Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the end of 2012, the podcast that fondly remembers nostalgia. This is your host, Shane Killian. In this special edition, we'll look back over 2012, remembering the ridiculous and the outrageous alike. But first, the news of the bogus. Of course, there are news items about which the less said the better. We had the usual War on Christmas Bogosity, but there was nothing new in that this year. The other big news item is the Sandy Hook school shooting. And there's really nothing to cover here about the shooting itself that hasn't already been covered to death. We certainly aren't going to give any more undeserved attention to the gunman. However, there was plenty of Bogosity being spewed around in the wake of the tragedy. It took the advocates of gun control 0.57 seconds to shamelessly and disgustingly turn this tragedy into yet another call for their bogus and falsified assault on peaceful people. And of course, when freedom advocates respond to them, they hypocritically accuse them of exactly the same thing. One of the worst was Piers Morgan himself. Here he is debating Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America.
You have over 300 million guns. You have 311 million people, many of which are children. You have more than a gun per adult in this country, and you have by far the worst rate of gun murder and gun crime of any of the civilized countries of this world.
Gee, do you think the failed and insane war on drugs might have anything to do with that? Hey, Morgan, you don't get to just make cross-cultural comparisons. There are way too many factors you need to control for.
How can you possibly argue that the answer... I'm asking you this question. How can you argue that the logical... Please stop laughing.
Yeah, you think Morgan might feel a little threatened by what he suspects Pratt is going to say?
Why do you believe, given that you have 300 million guns in circulation and the worst gun crime rate of any of the civilized countries of the world, that more guns is the answer to less gun murder?
Because the problem occurs, sir, in those areas precisely where we have said no guns. The problem doesn't occur where the guns are allowed freely to be carried, to be used by people. There we have very low murder rates. We have lower murder rates in other parts of the country than even in Europe, than even where you come from. But what has created the problem in the United States is to say in cities, in schools, those are areas where we're not going to allow people to defend themselves.
What is the murder rate in Great Britain?
Yep, he's presented with the facts, and he goes right back to the cross-cultural comparison. It's as if the gun control nuts have nothing else to fall back on.
That is true.
Lower, it's 35 against 12,000.
Your violent crime rate, your violent crime rate is higher than ours, as is the violent crime rate in Australia. America is not the Wild West that you are depicting. We only have the problem in our cities and unhappily in our schools, where people like you have been able to get laws put on the books that keep people from being able to defend themselves. I honestly don't understand why you would rather have people be victims of a crime than be able to defend themselves. It's incomprehensible.
You're an unbelievably stupid man, aren't you?
Wow. Of all the sentences that say, "I've just lost the debate and I'm too much of a dishonest, deluded moron to admit it," are there any that say it better than that one?
What a ridiculous argument. You have absolutely no coherent argument whatsoever. You don't give a damn, do you, about the gun murder rate in America? You don't actually care. All you care about is the right for any American. It seems to me that
facts don't bother you, do they, Mr. Morgan?
You would like to see...
Facts don't seem to... They bounce right off of your head.
Yep, ad hominems away. And this isn't an isolated incident. Here's another segment on the subject he did with 3 different panelists.
And the Australians, led by the Prime Minister John Howard, who was right-wing, friend of George W. Bush, he brought in pretty draconian new laws after that. He banned semi-automatic and automatic rifles and shotguns. As a result, over the next decade, firearm homicide rate fell by 59%. The firearm suicide rate fell by 65%.
That's not true.
That is true.
No, it's not.
That is true.
If you look over time...
You say it's not true. It is true.
No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Apparently, Morgan abides by the is to, I can't hear you, la 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 school of debate.
I'm telling you, people can go and look up the Australian national statistics themselves. And what you find is that For decades, the murder rate was falling in Australia. It basically stopped falling.
Exactly. If you want to claim that a fall is a result of something that happened in year X, you have to demonstrate that it wasn't falling by at least that rate before year X. And in fact, these before and after scenarios provide us with a much better indication of the effectiveness of a policy than Morgan's bogus cross-cultural comparisons.
Why would a woman teacher at a kindergarten need these weapons in her home, allowing, therefore, a clearly deranged son to take them and commit this atrocity?
You know, whatever that gun looks like, it's a semi-automatic rifle. Any hunting rifle, just about, is a semi-automatic rifle. Just because it looks different on the outside doesn't mean it functions differently.
But he fired off over 100 rounds in several minutes.
What? It fires over 100 rounds in several minutes? Does Morgan not know that there are 60 seconds in a minute? If we consider several minutes to be 5, then that's a bullet every 3 seconds. Yeah, a really scary statistic there, Morgan. I'm calling that a basic math fail.
Look, with this apparently harmless assault rifle.
Nobody said guns were harmless.
Yes, the combination straw man nirvana fallacy. Amazing how often those wishing to violate the rights of others resort to that, isn't it?
He fired over 100 rounds, and he killed 20 children.
With 2 handguns, Morgan. The rifle you're talking about was in his trunk at the time. He committed the shootings with 2 handguns. Jeez.
Have occurred where guns are banned. Okay? Well, look at the Aurora movie theater shooting. There were 7 movies.
What the hell has that got to do with it?
The point.
Seriously, what has that got to do with it?
Well, you never let me explain.
You think he checked it was a gun-free zone?
Well, maybe if you'd shut up and listen, he'll tell you.
There were 7 movie theaters showing the Batman movie within a 20-minute drive of where the killer lived. Only one of those banned guns. He didn't go to the movie theater closest to his home. He didn't go to the movie theater with the largest screen. He went to the one movie theater that banned guns. Now, if you look at bans generally, you can't point to a place, Chicago, D.C., where we banned guns. Murder rates, violent crimes went up afterwards. In the UK, in Jamaica, Ireland, island nations that have banned guns, you can't find a place where murder rates have actually gone down. They've gone up, usually by large amounts.
You cannot find a place.
Okay. Let me bring it down here.
And Morgan has no answer to him. But Morgan's the sensible one and his opponents are stupid, right? I hereby declare Piers Morgan to be worse than Bill O'Reilly. A petition has been circulating to get Morgan deported to Britain as a result of this. The petition, posted to the White House website, reads, quote, British citizen and CNN television host Piers Morgan is engaged in a hostile attack against the U.S. Constitution by targeting the Second Amendment. We demand that Mr. Morgan be deported immediately for his efforts to undermine the Bill of Rights and for exploiting his position as a national network television host to stage attacks against the rights of American citizens. As of the writing of this podcast, the petition has over 82,000 signatures. It's unclear if the petition is tongue-in-cheek or not. If it's not, it's just as bogus as Morgan is. He has the right to say what he wants, just like anyone else does, but what's funny is the reaction to this petition from across the pond. Apparently, the British don't want him back. This second petition, again at the White House website, has only 5,200 signatures, but that's because it had only been up for a couple of days. Give them time to catch up. Also, there are fewer people in the UK, so as a portion of the population it's more impressive. Okay, so nothing's going to come out of either petition, but it is a good statement that there aren't a lot of people willing to put up with Morgan's Bogosity. And in fact, Morgan has come out and said that if the US doesn't enact gun control, he's gonna give up and go back to England on his own. Don't let the door hit your butt on the way out, Morgan. It wouldn't be the first time guns have been used to drive back British who want to take our rights. But still, there are a lot of people who want gun control despite all the evidence. Fortunately, we have people like Penn Jillette to put them in their place. Here he is on The Wendy Williams Show.
Most bordering on all people with mental health do no damage to anyone, ever.
and most people who have guns do no damage to anyone. This is an atrocity, but this is also an anomaly. And we have to be very careful, those of us who are on TV, to not spend our time scaring children in order to make political points. What happened there was horrible, but we must remember it's very, very rare. We can save many more children by taking better care of our swimming pools and by using seatbelts. The way children die is many ways. We should do a little bit of prioritizing because this is way down on the list. Up on the list is swimming pools, and up on the list is caring for children in ways we really can. And fighting against stuff that is a complete anomaly can be a waste of time, can be grandstanding, and can also scare our children.
Wow, a sensible, rational response? That's refreshing to see, isn't it?
Where the teachers are now either about to start carrying guns or they all carry guns. The teachers, would that make the schools safer?
You did compare...
It's the most idiotic thing I've ever
you're going to use it. I think so also.
You did compare it to terrorist attacks. You did not compare it to other things like getting vaccines out to people. What show business has done is made vaccines seem bad, and people are dying of whooping cough in Beverly Hills.
Arming teachers is the answer?
No, I was saying this before that.
Exactly. How on earth can the celebrities and the news media get all indignant about school shootings when they're partly to blame for all this vaccine hysteria that has directly resulted in children dying of easily preventable diseases? Penn went on to debunk the idea that things like violent video games were to blame.
Really? So busy buying Call of Duty, there needs to be more hugs in households.
Those aren't mutually exclusive. Well, nothing in Call of Duty says you can't hug your family.
Well, you know what? This boy's favorite game pen was Call of Duty.
Yes, and many peaceful people. You're doing the same thing. Call of Duty is the most popular game there is. Everyone's playing it, so of course bad people are going to play it too.
Yeah.
To try to blame Shakespeare and the violence in Shakespeare and the violence in art for violence that happens in the real world is something that's been tried for years and is always wrong.
And then Sue Simmons chimed in with this.
Now, here's a kid who was borderline autistic with Asperger's. They have a lot of social problems.
But they don't know how to... No violent problems.
No. Autistic kids are usually victims. My point is that if you sit this kid in a room all day shooting people, if they have no social skills...
How do you know that?
Because
it's been...
Well,
he had no social skills. It's been reported.
There's no evidence that Asperger's syndrome people go violent from playing games.
No, this is not about Asperger's.
You have not one data point of evidence on that.
There's no guilt. There's no conscience.
That's not true that there's no guilt and no conscience.
He wouldn't make eye contact with his barber.
Please don't tear those people apart. I have good friends with Asperger's. They have conscience. They have empathy. All of that is not true. You're spreading lies about people who are part of our society.
Right on, Penn. As the father of an autistic son, I am so grateful that you were there that day. Autistics do not have problems with violence. They are not lacking guilt or conscience or empathy. That would make them psychopaths. Autistics are not psychopaths. I hereby nominate Sue Simmons for Worst Human Being Alive. Of course, whenever there's a tragedy, you can count on the low-life scum at Westboro Baptist Church to go and picket the funeral, and the Newtown tragedy was no different. They produced a video called God Sent the Shooter and vowed to protest at the memorial services. But even though the Supreme Court rightly ruled the government can take no action against the protesters, having free speech and all, a biker gang from New York came up with a better and peaceful idea. They stood together, arms linked, forming a wall so that the mourners would not see any protesters. And Westboro Baptist protesters were nowhere to be seen. Were they driven away at the thought of the bikers blocking their view? Did they show up and realize it would be fruitless? Or was there some other reason? Who knows? But this is a much better response to them than trying to get government to silence them or label them a hate group, because if you do that, you're playing right into their hands. In April of 2011, police in North Carolina stopped and subsequently searched a car because the occupants, according to the police, appeared to be nervous. They claimed the car had crossed the fog line, but that's not what the police dash cam showed. But now, the North Carolina Court of Appeals threw out their conviction. Quote, "Here, the state argues that Ms. Canty's alleged crossing of the fog line Ms. Canty's and defendant's alleged nervousness and failure to make eye contact with the officers as they drove by and drove alongside the patrol car, and the vehicle slowed speed for reasonable suspicion, were legitimate grounds for the traffic stop. Based on the totality of the circumstances, these factors fall short of reasonable suspicion. First, the state's evidence shows that there was no traffic violation. State's Exhibit 8 shows that the vehicle did not cross the fog line in the 45-second interval before Corporal Bass engaged the lights and siren. Corporal Bass testified that he only turned on the blue lights and siren after he saw the vehicle cross the fog line. Second, even in the absence of a verifiable traffic code violation, the officer's beliefs about defendant and Ms. Canty's conduct amounts to nothing more than an unparticularized suspicion or hunch. Nervousness, slowing down, and not making eye contact is nothing unusual when passing law enforcement stationed on the side of the highway. We find it hard to believe that these officers could tell Ms. Canty and defendant were nervous as they passed by the officers on the highway and as the officers momentarily rode alongside them. Nervousness, failure to make eye contact with law enforcement, and a relatively small reduction in speed is conduct falling within the broad range of what can be described as normal driving behavior. Based on the totality of the circumstances, these officers lacked reasonable suspicion to initiate the traffic stop that resulted in the search and seizure. Since we have found that the search of the vehicle was illegal, a motion to suppress would likely succeed. The court ordered a new trial, but if they're correct, there will surely be a motion to suppress and the case would be over. Bravo for the appeals court. If the police can pull you over just because they think you look nervous, they can stop any person for any reason at any time. Things are bad enough as it is, but this court at least stopped it from getting any worse. Now let's take a Dramamine as we look back over the bogus news throughout 2012. One thing we saw was a lot of cops behaving badly. And I didn't come anywhere close to covering all the stories I had found and that other people had sent me. In fact, to be honest, I'm tired of talking about it. But even then, there were still cases so extreme they just had to be mentioned. When departments started denying applications for people to be cops because of a high IQ and a court upheld it, it was probably an omen for the rest of the year. Cops continued to raid the wrong house and shoot family dogs that were no threat to them. A Georgia kindergartner was handcuffed for throwing a tantrum. A dad was repeatedly tasered and hosed until he drowned, while his kids were watching. A pregnant woman was kicked in the stomach. Protesters were arrested, some at gunpoint. And a man was tasered by police while trying to save his burning home. Our schools didn't fare that well either, with some of them confiscating homemade lunches, some requiring students to give them their Facebook passwords. A high school nurse denied an asthmatic student an inhaler and watched him lose consciousness without calling 911. A valedictorian was denied her diploma because she said hell. One district banned father-daughter dances because single mothers wanted to take their kids to it. One teacher decried peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as not being multicultural, when you'd be hard-pressed to find a better example of multicultural food. Texas schools punished students who didn't want to be tracked with microchips. And a school district called victims that were sexually molested by two of their teachers negligent and careless. We saw once again the government doesn't care about the homeless, with government cracking down on jobs for the homeless, including homeless Wi-Fi hotspots and a newspaper giving jobs to the homeless. New York City banning food donations to the homeless because it might have too much salt. One city tried to ban sitting on sidewalks, and a 13-year-old's hot dog cart was shut down, driving him and his disabled parents into homelessness because it would compete with downtown restaurants. The creationists were out and about this year quite a bit, most notably in the pseudo-debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye the Science Guy, where Ham denied just about every piece of scientific evidence ever. New York City tried to ban the word dinosaur and other offensive words from their curriculum. We also saw a school curriculum try and use the Loch Ness Monster to disprove evolution, and the Texas GOP put opposition to teaching critical thinking skills in its platform. There was a lot of international bogosity as well. We saw yet more atrocities in countries with universal health care, such as the denial of basic ambulance service in Sweden, over 100,000 elderly patients being left to die in the UK, and a Canadian man was denied hospital admission because of his goth garb. A German university sued a student who graduated too fast, saying he owed them the tuition money he would have paid if he'd gone the full 4 years. The Italian scientists prosecuted for failing to predict an earthquake, which is scientifically impossible, were actually convicted of manslaughter. And WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange continues to cool his heels in the Ecuadorian Assembly in the UK, where police have said they'll arrest him if he so much as steps out of the door. We also saw a lot of copyright cronyism rear its ugly head, particularly with regards to the file-sharing site The Pirate Bay. Governments, particularly the UK, tried to block access to the site, and it just resulted in increased traffic, even after they went after proxies and mirror sites. The file-sharing site Mega Upload was shut down by authorities, and Wikipedia was taken down for 1 day in a self-imposed blackout to protest the Stop Online Piracy Act, a move which the MPAA called an abuse of power. Well, they'd know, wouldn't they? LimeWire was sued for literally more money than exists on the planet. And to top it all off, the big music labels refused to share any of the money collected from these court cases with the artists, whom they kept claiming were the damaged parties. Their actions have made it very difficult for visually impaired people in many countries to enjoy ebooks. A NASA video of the landing of the Mars rover, which was a really cool event in 2012 by the way, was taken down for copyright violation, even though everything NASA produces is public domain. The UK even blocked a perfectly legit site, the Promo Bay, solely because it's run by the Pirate Bay, although thankfully this order has since been overturned. And then there was that Chick-fil-A anti-gay thing. There was a lot of bogosity from both sides, but we gotta give the edge here to Chick-fil-A for lying about the reason Jim Henson withdrew their toys for inclusion into kids' meals, scaring kids and parents by claiming it was a safety recall. Something else went on this year too. What was it? Seems like it was in the news once or twice. Oh yeah, that election thing. And boy did we see bogosity there. A lot of it centered around the Ron Paul campaign, as the news media did their best to marginalize him and even smear him with a 20-year-old newsletter story that was debunked a decade ago. At the Republican convention, delegates for Ron Paul were silenced, deliberately misdirected so they wouldn't show up for a critical vote, and valid nomination votes for Ron Paul deliberately went uncounted to give Mitt Saddam Hussein Romney his 100% unanimous victory. More shenanigans that went on at the Republican convention included an important rules change which required a 2/3 vote, which it clearly didn't get, but it was confirmed anyway as the speaker read the predetermined result from the teleprompter. Similar shenanigans went on over at the Democratic convention when almost exactly the same thing happened. This time, a platform change requiring a 2/3 vote was declared victorious after the chair asked for the vote. When the voice vote came out about even, meaning it failed, he got this kind of deer-in-the-headlights look and asked for another vote. It came out the same way, but he read the affirmation off the prompter anyway. This is how little either party cares about your votes. Meanwhile, the state of Michigan violated its own laws and court precedents to keep Gary Johnson off the ballot, and Oklahoma likewise engaged in election fraud by keeping Johnson off the Americans Elect ballot even though they'd successfully obtained ballot access. And, of course, the courts happily confirmed the legitimacy of this voter fraud. And then, of course, there was that idiotic Obamacare ruling, which warranted a full podcast on its own. It wasn't all bad news, though. The Supreme Court confirmed that cops need a warrant before tracking someone's car through GPS. A federal study absolutely demolished all of the DEA's reasons for classifying marijuana as a Schedule I narcotic. Not that they've changed their policy or anything. Some Latin American countries legalized certain drugs for personal use, and several U.S. states nullified bad laws. Virginia nullified the NDAA, Montana, Wyoming, and Alabama nullified the individual mandate portion of Obamacare, Massachusetts legalized medical marijuana, and Colorado and Washington legalized marijuana for personal use. So in 2012, as usual, we had some good things happen, but we had to take the good with the bad. Now it's time to wrap this up with a look at notable idiots and other peddlers of Bogosity, and to name the 2012 Idiot of the Year. We had our government nannies, of course, like Pierre Ducon, who wanted to give kids with low BMIs higher grades in school, even though the BMI is a bogus metric that was never even intended to be a health indicator. The Bakers Union took down Hostess, destroying jobs not just for its workers, but other workers as well, because they didn't realize that a bankruptcy restructuring means that cuts have to be made. We had the predictable moron saying that Hurricane Sandy was a boon to the economy, your basic broken window fallacy. And of course there was religious bogosity, from the Pope saying that homosexuality is a threat to humanity itself, to Spanish Bishop Javier Martinez saying it was acceptable to rape women who've had an abortion. Certainly recognition must go to the repeat offenders, those who won either award more than once. The news media took their share as usual, not just with the election coverage, but with things like blaming a woman's death on Coca-Cola without having the slightest evidence to back it up. Little wonder then that a study showed public confidence in the news media at an all-time low. And of course there was Paul Krugman and his amazing time-traveling econometrics, to whom actually spending within one's means is crazy and radical. In a similar vein, Ben Bubbles Bernanke got his share as well, mostly for his new QE3 policy of trying to get another housing bubble going. Barack Obama racked up another few as well. As Solyndra destroyed brand new parts they were supposed to sell off, Obama refused to answer numerous questions about marijuana policy, even though they were the highest rated of those submitted to him. He racked up a lot of bogosity through his infamous "you didn't build that" speech, and his administration went to great lengths to defend the NDAA in court while refusing to assure the court that it wasn't indefinitely detaining American citizens. It's actually kind of amazing that Mitt Romney was never named, considering all the stupid stuff he said, but there was always someone dumber ready to jump in and beat him to it. But that's okay, the GOP more than made up for it with their own asinine behavior. So who is the 2012 Idiot of the Year? Obama? Krugman? Bubbles? Actually, since our last podcast, there was one who snuck in at the last minute to leave them all in the dust.
You know, invariably people ask after tragedies like this, how could God let this happen?
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing. We ask why there's violence in our schools, but we've systematically removed God from our schools.
And this was far from the only example. Several other right-wing TV pundits said the same thing. A t-shirt circulating around the internet reads, "Dear God, why do you allow so much violence in our schools?" Signed, a concerned student. Beneath that, it gives God's reply, "Dear concerned student, I'm not allowed in schools. God." So we have the same depths of depravity of the gun control nuts using a tragedy to push a political agenda. We also have the same excuse-making that religious apologists always come up with to explain away uncomfortable truths. And we also have the niggling little facts that prayer is allowed in schools as long as it's not teacher-led, that violence in schools has been dropping, and that such shootings have also taken place in churches. It's an epic fail, but why does it rise to the level of Idiot of the Year? Because, although apparently none of them realize it, they have completely undermined everything they stand for and everything they try to claim about God. If this is the case, if God was not able to stop the violence from happening because government banned him from schools, then we are left with the following valid and sound syllogism. Premise 1. Government has successfully kept God out of schools. Premise 2. As has been repeatedly seen, government has been completely unable to keep drugs out of schools. Heck, government can't even keep drugs out of its own prisons. Leading to the inescapable and unavoidable conclusion. Drug dealers are more powerful than God. Yes, the flunky junkie selling nickel bags to sophomores in the bathroom was able to achieve what God was completely unable to do. God is supposed to be all-powerful and all-knowing, yet his power and his knowledge can't compare to that of the stoner at the back of the classroom. This is beyond epic fail. It is an absolute destruction of the very foundation of their claims. And that is why only Mike Huckabee and everyone else who made this moronic claim sped past the competition at the last minute to become the 2012 Idiot of the Year. Well, that wraps up this MMXII edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please join us next year as we debunk even more Bogosity. Until then, please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you'd like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening, and thanks also to those who contributed this past year, sending links and recordings. And thanks as well to my occasional co-hosts, Jonathan Loche and Tim Dyson. Have a very happy new year, and until we rejoin in January, stay strong, be free, and pay no attention to those bogons behind the curtain. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license.
Bogosity.